Hello, a very warm welcome and a good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Saurabh Kumar and I help out with APJ marketing at H2O. Today, we have Shivam Bansal with us. Shivam is a senior data scientist and a Kaggle Grandmaster at H2.ai. He has extensive cross industry experience and has hands on experience in building data science products, has won various AI and data science competitions, and is a National University of Singapore alum. Today, Shivam will go over responsible and ethical AI and answer any questions you have on the subject. Now let's get right to it. Over to you, Shivam.
Thank you, Saurabh. I'm really excited to be part of this social life conversation and talk about my experience about responsible AI and, in general, some of the market trends and industry trends responsible AI is witnessing. So, to give a quick introduction about the topic, essentially, first we have to understand some of the context. So recent developments in AI and data science and machine learning have seen a big impact across different industries, be it financial sector, be it healthcare, be it retail, be it e-commerce. Well, it has also created many new opportunities to improve the lives of the people around the world and across different corporates, healthcare, and education. However, with this advancement, with all these new developments that world has seen, it has also uh, make new concerns and new questions about what are some of the best ways to build fairness, build trust, build interpretability, privacy, and security around these systems. Well, now explainable AI and the pursuit of technology and statistical methods to explain the machine learning models is becoming a much hot question and much more important question for the today's era. Be it data scientists, be it business analysts, be it stakeholders, explainable AI is becoming very important. Hence, the best practices in applying AI is not just about a statistical question anymore, but it's also about people question as well as process question. Because the people who are involved in the whole journey, as well as the processes that one has taken to produce that AI, is very important. And all of these questions around fairness, ethics, trust, interpretability essentially forms key elements of responsible AI. So responsible AI essentially is a big umbrella under which all of these different terminologies reside. But why essentially we need responsible AI? Why do we need responsible AI in these different domains? Well, responsible AI is very important because it facilitates the business adoption of machine learning and AI by enhancing the understanding of complex model mechanisms. We know that some of the machine learning architectures these days, and including the deep learning architectures, they are quite comprehensive, they are quite complex. And if we have to take these complex models to production, then there is a concern about security, trust, and how can we rely on these models. So to enhance the understanding of these type of sophisticated system, we need the elements of responsible AI. And at the same time, when we talk about deployment of such complex models at scale, there is some level of risk because there are some things like cyber attacks or maybe decay in the model or drift in the model. So we need to ensure that that risk is minimized when we talk about deploying of such complex models in production at very large scale. At the same time, now AI and data science is not just about data scientists, it is about business, it is about engineers, it is about analysts as well. So we need to understand very deeply into the insights and into the data sets, into some of the unique patterns and behavior that our models have learned. And that's where responsible AI helps in getting that deeper insights into the models and the data. And of course, with all these, we need to ensure that there is a trust that is built into the models that we have already put into production. And finally, we need to also facilitate fairness by automatically testing for things like discrimination or bias, especially in the regulated industries. For example, if we are talking about a bank, and let's say the data science team of a bank has built a machine learning model to accept or reject loan applications. Now, the bank cannot just accept that model before answering these main questions about fairness or discrimination, because there may be instances where, let's say, the model is accepting the loans of some category of individuals and always rejecting the loans of other category of individual. The category can be based on, say, gender, can be based on race, ethnicity, location, income level, and so on. And that's where, in fact, this regulation and compliance becomes very important topics. To highlight this instance, Singapore, Monetary Authority of Singapore, they released the guidelines to ensure fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency in the use of artificial intelligence and data analytics, mainly in the financial sector. So there is a proper regulation and a guidelines that have been enforced in Singapore, and it is more likely to be enforced at other global places as well as in other industries as well, not just financial. And why Singapore government enabled these principles, FEET principles, because they wanted to clarify some objectives, such as they wanted to ensure that all the firms that are providing financial products or services, they align with all the decision making that aligns with this FEET principle. They also want to assist the firms in contextualizing and operationalizing governance of use in artificial intelligence and data science in their own business models and structure. And at the same time, they also want to promote confidence and trust in the use of these different complex models as such. So definitely, we do see a need of big AI, responsible AI elements. One more example that I would like to cite is the case of bias in the hiring industry. There is some level of unconscious bias when it comes to hiring. Uh, Typically, the recruiter or the hiring managers, they are not aware of some unconscious bias which they have towards particular candidates, and they tend to ignore it. And with the use of AI models and data science models, now the data and their decisions can be monitored very well, and that bias can be quantified. So to make sure that the all the companies are hiring very uh, by following the principle of responsible AI. Well, there were other instances. I think there was a news about a couple of years ago where Apple Card was rejecting particular type of payments from based on the gender, I believe. So there was some gender bias or racial bias inbuilt in the model itself. And one of the state of the art model architectures that have been released recently are GANs model, which are generative adversarial networks, generative adversarial machine learning, deep learning architectures that are used to generate new data sets, that are used to generate adversarial examples of the data. Now, some of these GAN models have also seen some level of bias. For example, there was a face generation model, and what we saw that when we decrease the, let's say, the smile component in the face generation, thus the face that is generated is not the one which is commonly aligned, which is common of the whole population, essentially in terms of race or maybe in the color. So some of these models do have this kind of bias or unconscious, uh, unethical or unbiased stuff as such. So that's where we want to ensure that responsible AI is present at every element when we talk about deploying and adopting artificial intelligence in the today's era. Now, going deeper into responsible AI, there are essentially six main categories that are comprising of the core themes or core elements of responsible AI. The one is explainable AI. Explainable AI means understanding the model outcomes, understanding the decisions made by the model once it has been developed. Here, what we are essentially talking about is, let's say we have a model. We want to understand why this model is making a particular prediction. Let's take the same example of loan acceptance or a rejectance. Once that, let's say, this model has been developed, we want to understand why this model is saying that one particular individual will be rejected a loan versus the other will be accepted a loan. What are some of the features that contribute in this model decision? What are some of the reason codes that contributes into this particular decision as such? And at the same time, we want to understand what is the underlying behaviors or the patterns that these models have learned to make sure that the whole process is transparent. So this is something we called as explainable AI or XAI. The next piece is interpretable machine learning, where we are essentially talking about the underlying model transparency. So as I mentioned before, that there are two ways. One is deep learning, where the models can become very complex, and the other way can be they are simple linear models, where we know that some of the linear equations are embedded into the models. So linear models are definitely uh, more explainable, because we know that what are some of the mathematical equations that they have learned. But when we talk about, say, complex deep learning models, then we sometimes lose the interpretable mechanism to understand what is the underlying some of the architectures or the equations that they have learned as such. So that is where we talk about interpretable machine learning techniques, where we are talking about ML models itself as the interpretable. The third component of responsible AI is ethical AI. As I mentioned about the fairness and the bias in today's machine learning problems. So ethical AI involves principles of maintaining or measuring or quantifying fairness or bias within the data set or within the model. For example, financial services have been required for a long time to be able to prove that their algorithm did not treat one demographic of a person more unfairly than the other. And they also have to explain how they know that. So that's where we need to come up with principles like ethical AI, and we can use techniques like discrimination testing, adversarial impact, and sensitivity analysis to understand if the models are ethical enough. And the fourth component is secure AI. So secure AI is becoming more and more important in the today's era. The idea behind secure AI is that we will have a trained model, maybe in the production, but as a data scientist, as a user, we will not be able to see if there are some changes that have been made into the model. And those changes may be some attacks. There may be some cyber attacks, there may be some adversarial attacks, where the attackers generally change one or two very small parameters, but they may have big impact in the model behavior and the prediction. Think about self-driving cars. If we have, let's say, models into self-driving cars, and somehow some of the attackers change some weights and parameters of the models, then there may be very adverse impact. There may be big damage that the models can do. So it is very important to ensure that models are aligned with secure AI, and we should ensure that there is some level of security, or we make sure that models are robust enough. We do the enough testing and make the models which are not just generalized, not just overfitted, but are robust. So which can accept all those attacks and still does not produce the non-expected behavior as such. The last piece is human-centered AI, where we are talking about things like human in the loop or user interactions with AI and ML system. Well, now as I mentioned, that adopting AI is not just driven by data or not just driven by a complete machine learning workflow or data scientist, but the role of humans, business guys, is also very important at every stage of the ML pipeline, which includes creating features, which includes validating what models have learned, which includes that what model is producing also aligns with the business expectations and some of the domain experience. So we need to ensure that we just don't rely on the models automatically built, but also validate using human validation as such. So these 6 principles under responsible AI, to summarize, include explainable AI, interpretable machine learning, ethical AI, secure AI, human-centered AI, and also compliant, which essentially means complying with some of the regulations. So this pretty much sums up my talk about responsible AI. So I would love to have if there are any questions.
Yes. Can you hear me, Shivam?
Yes, Saurabh, I can hear you.
Great. So we have a few questions from our audiences. Let's just begin. Number one, will I be compromising on the performance of my models if I care too much about responsible AI?
Oh, that's a very good question. I would say one of the one of the trade-offs that big trade-off that exists in the whole machine learning life cycle is to compromise accuracy versus the interpretability. Sometimes interpretability is more important, sometimes accuracy is more important. But if I recall from my what I said a couple of minutes ago, that there are two parts of responsible AI. One is explainable AI, and the second is interpretable machine learning. They do seem same, but there is an underlying difference. Explainable AI means our models can be very complex. Our models may include some deep learning models, which will have very high predictive power and which will have very good accuracy. But when we are talking about explainability, we are not going deeper into the model architectures itself to explain what they have learned, but rather we are explaining their decisions, why they are making a particular prediction, what are the features that are impacting that particular prediction. So if we take this route, if we talk about, we can still have high accuracy with the complex models, and we can use techniques like Shapley, partial dependency, permutation importance, decision trees, surrogate modeling, to understand the interpretability or explainability around that. So both interpretability as well as accuracy can be achieved if we take this route. However, if the business expectation is you also explain the model architecture itself, in those cases we might have to take approach of simple models which are much more explainable but may not have high accuracy.
Great. Next question. Sorry, I think there was some echo. What would be the top 3 challenges in implementing a responsible AI workflow in my organization?
Yeah. So responsible AI, as I mentioned, is something which the industries have started witnessing, and I believe it will become more and more important in the coming years. And of course, there will be some more challenges. So this is actually a very important question. So one of the main challenge that I see with adopting responsible AI will be around confidentiality. So we sometimes, some of the startups and some of the good data science teams and also Kaggle, uh, many data scientists use their secret sauce. They use some of their secret algorithms, and from the company perspective, they may have some IP which is bounded to those models and those techniques. But if we have to be completely transparent, completely aligned with uh, responsible AI, then those secrets might have to be made available to the public. So we may lose confidentiality. Second is around the security aspect. So I did mention about secure AI. So there is also a trade-off between secure AI and also explainable AI. For example, if someone can have access to the reasoning of the model decision making, they can apply reverse engineering. In the data science space, we can do something like adversarial behavior by incrementally changing their behavior to influence the decision making process of the model. So someone can actually do it once they have the complete transparency and the complete explainability. So thus explainability raises concern about robustness, and then it will be difficult to also ensure that the models are explainable at the same time they are also secure. So this will be one of the challenge to make the models robust as possible, by not compromising quite a lot on the explainability part as such. So these are two main challenges that I see with adopting responsible AI.
Thank you, Shivam. Next question. We hear multiple different terms referring to possibly the same thing: responsible AI, ethical AI, interpretability of ML models. Can you briefly, I know you touched upon it in your introduction, can you briefly explain if there is a distinction between these?
Yeah, maybe I can recall very quickly to make the distinction between them. So responsible AI is the big umbrella under which all these key elements reside: ethical AI, interpretability, explainable AI, and so on. Most interchangeably, the terms which are being used are interpretable AI and explainable AI. Interpretable AI, as I mentioned, that it is the ability to explain the model architectures. What is the underlying pipeline within the model itself? What are the cost functions? What are those mathematical functions that model has learned? And we can explain that very easily. So that is something which is called as interpretability. And that's why interpretability of linear models, decision trees is much higher, but it is a bit complex for deep learning models. And explainable AI is focusing on explaining the results of the model. It can be simple model, it can be complex model, but why they are taking particular decisions. Can we explain them by talking about feature contribution, by talking about Shapley values, by talking about sensitivity analysis of the model, or maybe surrogate modeling, uh, where we are taking the same raw data but the complex model output and replacing the complex model with a simple model, which may be a decision tree, and explaining some of the behaviors or the reason codes of why a model is making particular prediction.
Sorry, I think there was some internet issue. Thank you, Shivam. Next question. How technically sound does a C-suite stakeholder have to be so that he or she can understand the explanations?
Okay, very important question for again the coming AI decade, I would say. Uh, One thing I would like to talk about here is about there are different types of data scientists. So there are some data scientists which are very close to the technical side, data side. Then there are some data scientists which are close to the business side, or maybe close to domain side. And then there are, on the other hand, there are different type of business individuals, business guys, which have the domain expertise, which knows how the business is run, which knows what are things which impact the business. And then there comes a gray area in between these data scientists and these business guys, which we can call this term as say business scientist, which have some knowledge of data science, which understands what is the impact of the model. They may no need to know the underlying details of all the machine learning techniques and the models, but they know what are the impact, what the data science can do. And at the same time they have some knowledge of business as well, or maybe they are expert in the business. So I would say it is good to have that, good to be fit in that gray area where there is an overlap between business knowledge as well as some level of data science. So they no need to be very technically sound, but they should know the implications and the impact and the possibilities of adopting AI and data science in their practice.
Thank you. I'm sure that was very helpful. Last question before we wrap up. Can responsible AI also address our concerns on model bias and fairness?
That's correct. So one of the element of responsible AI essentially means is ethical AI, as I mentioned, and we have techniques like discrimination testing or adverse impact analysis. So the role of these techniques is to debug the model at a data level, at a category level, and see how the model is accurate across different categories. For example, if we talk about locations, is the model is 80% accurate in one location, but it is 90% accurate in the other location. So then this is a strong signal of some level of bias. This can be very important when we talk about things like ethnicity or race, especially in the lending problems, let's say. So again, that a bank has to approve or reject someone just based on the ethnicity. They should ensure these elements of ethical AI. So as I mentioned, using techniques like adverse impact analysis, where we measure the ratio of how different the accuracy and the performance of model is, how different true positives are, false positive are across different groups, we can actually come up with this discrimination testing measure. If it is very high, then we understand there is a large bias, and we can possibly do something to improve it. Maybe at the data level, maybe we have a data problem. We don't have a data of all the equally distributed locations. Maybe we can equally distribute it and then retrain the model. Or we may have a problem at the model itself. Maybe the model that we have used that is penalizing some of the smaller values and giving more weights to the higher values. So by understanding these measures, statistical measures, we can take some corrective actions.
Great. Thank you, Shivam. I think we're at the top of our allotted time. Do you have any concluding thoughts? I'll give you 30 seconds.
For sure. I think earlier, I think 2-3 years ago, what we used to call the data science life cycle, as starting from the data procurement, doing the data preparation, doing the model training, and the model deployment. That was the major high level pipeline. But nowadays and going forward, one very important aspect that every data scientist should incorporate in this life cycle is responsible AI as well, which immediately comes after model training and before the model deployment, which enables that whatever we have done as a data scientist or as a business scientist, this is explainable enough because this model may have a big impact, especially in this COVID scenario, talking about healthcare. So we need to ensure that the model that data scientists have produced, everyone trusts it. It aligns with ethical, it aligns with explainability, fairness, and all the principles that maybe some of the governments, for example, in case of Singapore, they are aligned with those principles as well. So it is very important to make an effort into responsible AI as well to bring in the pipeline more comprehensive and more explainable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shivam, for taking the time and talking to our audience. And thank you, audience, for joining us today. Stay tuned for more of these. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.